When it neared 2 in the afternoon, inmates slowly streamed out of the library, heading towards the factory area for their afternoon labor. No one noticed that there was one person who stayed seated opposite Carter, neither reading a book nor intending to leave. After all the inmates in the library left, Melvin carried his chair to stand in front of Carter's office desk, meaningfully calling out, "Officer James." Carter huffily said, "Just sit out there." Melvin said, "But I need to see the market trend." Exactly, the warden had actually allowed Melvin computer access. Carter had never seen a more preposterous thing. There were several data trend lines on the screen, but it wasn't convenient to change the direction of the monitor. Further, Carter had to keep an eye on Melvin to make sure that he didn't misuse his computer access, thus could only agree to Melvin sitting next to him. From the time that Carter started working here until today, no one had ever entered his work area, let alone touch his computer. But now 2 adult men were crammed in the tiny fan-shaped work area, and if Carter wasn't paying attention, his knees would bump into Melvin's. They were too close, outrageously close. Before this, Carter and Melvin were always separated by an 8 meters wide road. This road represented a safe distance, allowing Carter to be completely at ease. Now, don't even start on safe distancing. Even the normal interpersonal distance in day-to-day social interactions couldn't be preserved, wholly breaching into the range of intimacy. Only God knew how much Carter wanted to drive Melvin out of his work area. "Officer James, what is this?" Melvin's voice disrupted Carter's thoughts. He followed Melvin's line of sight and glanced at the screen, only to find that the cursor was stopped above a software icon, which, when opened, would bring up the surveillance video of the recreation room. "It's none of your business." Carter hurriedly snatched the mouse back from Melvin's hands, his fingertips brushing Melvin's fingers in the back of his hand. They still carried the remnants of the scabs left behind from Melvin's fight a few days ago, rough to the touch. "Other than pages relevant to stocks, you're not allowed to touch anything else," Carter said. "Got it." This time, it was Melvin who took the mouse away from Carter. His palm covered the back of Carter's hand, their complexions overlapping like oatmeal colliding against milk, looking inexplicably harmonious. As if scalded by an iron, Carter hastily drew his hand away. At this moment, he heard Melvin speak again. "You can start reading the book now, Officer James." The veins on Carter's temples bulged. "Aren't you studying the stock trends?" Melvin turned his head towards Carter. "What does that have anything to do with me listening to you read?" This was the first time that Carter met Melvin's eyes from such close proximity. The bright light from outside the window illuminated his irises into a pale brown, the precise shade of what Carter had seen through the monocular back when Melvin was drinking water by the second-floor window. Carter uncomfortably averted his gaze. He irritably picked up and began to read strawberry planting techniques aloud. As light-loving plants, dim lighting is inconducive to the growth of strawberries. Strawberries enjoy cooler climates. When strawberries are exposed to temperatures above 30 degrees Celsius in direct sunlight, appropriate measures need to be taken to provide shade. Once, twice, thrice. Unable to stand it anymore, Carter put down the book, looking at Melvin. He said, "Can you keep your thighs closed?" Their knees were always inadvertently bumping against each other. Melvin didn't seem to care much, but Carter was completely incapable of concentrating. The image of Melvin wearing shorts at home kept flashing in his mind. Sometimes when Melvin sat on the sofa cross-legged, the hem of his shorts would ride up to the root of his thighs, revealing the muscle lines of his toned legs. "Why do I have to close them?" But as Carter expected, Melvin didn't listen to him, keeping his legs casually spread in a certain arc. "Are you Mr. 100,000 wise?" Carter impatiently said. "If I tell you to close them, then close them. You're touching my knee." Melvin's gaze traveled down, pausing on their knees for a few seconds. He looked back at Carter, perhaps deliberate, perhaps not, persisting with his questions. "What's wrong with that?" Carter's brows involuntarily furrowed, a certain premonition once again emerging in his mind. "Of course it isn't allowed," Carter said sternly. "I'm a prison officer, you're an inmate." And right after he said this, Melvin's knee bumped against his again. Carter breathed in deeply, foul language already on the tip of the tongue, but at this time, Melvin suddenly raised his hands, the action accompanied by his voice. "Don't move." Before Carter could react, Melvin's palm was already caressing his cheek, and his thumb gently grazed the corner of his eye. "There's an eyelash." Melvin didn't stop for long, his hand withdrawing naturally after that. "You have very long eyelashes." His tone was as airy as if he was commenting on the good weather today, as normal as it could be. But eyelashes were not the weather, and not a conversational topic that people unfamiliar with each other could casually use. What on earth was up with this man? Carter had met inmates who had unintentionally touched him, also inmates who had intentionally touched him. Either way, he could tell the difference at a glance, only Melvin was completely unreadable to him. It was difficult to tell if he was doing it on purpose. His eyes were crystal clear and without the slightest note of teasing. But if it wasn't on purpose, his every action was impinging on Carter's comfort zone. After moving his hand away, Melvin acted as if nothing had happened and continued to watch the stock trends on the computer screen. The mood for the previous topic they were on was lost. He looked at Melvin for a while, in the end picking up the book again and went back to reading the characteristics of strawberries. Half an hour quickly passed. The warden agreed for Melvin to stay in the library until 2:30, which was right when the stock market closed for the day. Melvin used the library intercom to give the warden a few suggestions on what to buy and sell, then made to go to the factory area behind the admin block to participate in afternoon labor like other inmates. "See you tomorrow, Officer James." Melvin got up and walked out of the library. As his figure was right about to disappear beyond the doorway, Carter couldn't hold it in anymore, calling hold of him. "Melvin." This time, Carter didn't use Melvin's inmate number. Turning his body back partially, Melvin looked over at Carter. "Was there really an eyelash on my face just now?" Carter asked. Melvin laughed softly. As if shedding all pretense, his eyes finally showed obvious playfulness. "Guess." With that, Melvin followed the prison guard waiting at the door and left the library. Carter closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, barely containing his impulse to pound the surface of his desk. That guy really did do it on purpose. Some people had a tendency to review how they did after a face down. If they didn't put up a good fight, they would feel extremely peeved. Carter was feeling exactly this right now. He hated that he hadn't immediately seen through Melvin's intentions when it happened and let this guy get away with touching his face. Just now when Melvin reached out to him, what he should have done was catch his wrist and handcuff him. No. Even before that, when Melvin's knees were knocking against his, he should have used his baton to deliver a solid whack. The more Carter thought about it, the more he fumed. He took out a cigarette pack from the drawer and went to the opposite infirmary. The windows of the infirmary faced the factory area behind the admin block, differing from the library in that there was a small balcony on this side of the room where Carter and Luke often went to smoke. "What's up? You look ticked off." Luke lit both their cigarettes, softly exhaling a puff of smoke. "Have you ever encountered an inmate who gives you a headache?" Carter didn't broach the topic of Melvin straight out, mainly because he felt it was too humiliating to have been fooled by an inmate. "Sure I have," Luke said. "That kid Gavin is one right there." "Him?" Carter coldly glanced at Luke askew. "You're obviously more than happy to have a headache over him." Luke didn't insist on the topic. He knew what type of person Carter was. If Carter didn't want to spill, it was useless to ask anything more. The two men tacitly looked at the flat-roofed building beneath, smoking in silence. Just then, someone suddenly walked out of a greenhouse in the agricultural area. Carter's movement suddenly paused. He asked Luke, "What do they plant in the greenhouse?" The library windows faced the yard where inmates relaxed in their free time. Carter could swiftly give an account of the interpersonal connections between the inmates, but he wasn't familiar with the distribution of the factory area behind the office block. "The one that Melvin walked out of?" Luke pointed with his chin. "That's the greenhouse for planting strawberries." "All right, fine. He actually was growing strawberries." Melvin was carrying a bucket in his hand, standing at the meter-high tap to fill it with water. The sun was the fiercest at 3 in the afternoon, yet not a trace of annoyance could be seen on Melvin's face. He simply waited calmly for the bucket to fill up, occasionally wiping the beads of sweat from his forehead with the linen gloves. Indeed, Carter was still more accustomed to observing Melvin under such conditions. With a safe distance between them, he could clearly follow each one of Melvin's movements, whereas Melvin remained completely oblivious to his prying eyes. This comfortable state caused Carter's imagination to slip away without him meaning to. If, right now, the tap burst all of a sudden, and Melvin's entire body was drenched in water. Come to think of it, it's been quite a long time since he last saw Melvin topless. Hey! The sound of snapping fingers cut into Carter's imagination. He turned his head over to see Luke looking at him strangely. What is it? I've called you 3 times, Luke said. Carter glanced once more at Melvin in the distance and saw that he had already filled his bucket and was now walking back to the greenhouse. What's up with you? Luke asked. I know you're acting weird. Carter didn't answer him. It was just as Luke said. He himself also knew that he wasn't quite in the right mind. I invited another friend for our dinner on Friday, Luke said. Who? Asked Carter. The lawyer that I said I would introduce to you. Carter pursed his lips, reluctant for Luke to matchmake him. But perhaps out of his guilty conscience, or perhaps because he didn't want to be affected by Melvin again, he fell silent for a moment before reluctantly agreeing in the end. Okay. Carter and Luke had known each other for many years. Even if it wasn't to the extent of knowing each other inside out, they were still extremely familiar with each other's ways. The two of them were able to have a peaceful breakup and even remain friends after breaking up because they both knew that they weren't romantically compatible. Luke was 2 years older than Carter. He had a parental manner when dating and hoped that Carter would depend on him. He would remind Carter to drink warm water in the early mornings and to take a break if he had been doing visually strenuous activities like reading for too long. Carter found out from very early on that Luke liked to treat his significant other similarly to watching over a little brother. Therefore, when he first transferred to the prison, he could immediately tell that the way Luke treated a certain rascally brat in prison was special. On the flip side, Luke could also tell that Carter didn't like being taken care of. He didn't want to change his lifestyle habits and didn't want to depend on anyone. His ideal relationship was for both parties to be on equal footing, with neither side looking up to the other. There were no rights or wrongs in love, only whether or not the ways of expressing love matched. But their love languages were completely at odds with each other. Even if they tried their best to compromise, their breakup was inevitable. So, similar to how Carter understood Luke's preferences, Luke also understood Carter's preferences, not giving him leeway to refuse. Carter didn't want Luke to misunderstand that he was interested in Melvin. As such, even if he was in every way reluctant on the inside, he could only make proper preparations for the blind date. He still hadn't opened the new bottle of cologne. After finishing his toast and keeping the strawberry jam in the refrigerator, he just happened to remember this. This cologne lasted for quite a decent duration. As Carter didn't want to appear like he had put in too much effort, he sprayed some behind his ears and on his wrists before stepping out the door, so that the faint fragrance would be just nice when he got off work later. At 9 in the morning, by the time Carter was done delivering the mail, Melvin was already waiting at the door to the library. It was only then that Carter learned the central bank would report a series of stats in the morning, which would affect the trend for the day's market. Consequently, the warden had requested for him to be a book boy for Melvin all bright and early in the day. I'm saying this first. Carter went into his work area and turned on the computer. If you get fresh with me again today, you'd better be ready for the consequences. What consequences? Melvin walked into the work area as well, sitting next to Carter. His legs were still casually spread like yesterday, not showing any intention of backing down. Carter didn't deign him a response, only looking at the computer, making clear with his attitude that he couldn't be asked to bother with Melvin. The computer startup sound soon played. Carter moved the mouse in front of Melvin to let him open the web pages himself. However, at this moment, Melvin suddenly pressed his hand down, catching him completely unawares. Leaning in towards him. Carter unconsciously turned his head over and saw that Melvin's face was already startlingly close. He reflexively drew away, his back plastering tightly against his office chair. The chair reclined back. Melvin leaned in further still. 1017. Carter's brows knit. He wanted to move his hand from the mouse, but Melvin was pressing it firmly down, caging him in the narrow space between his chest and the office chair. For just a fleeting moment, Carter felt as though Melvin was going to kiss his neck. His other hand was already on the baton, but before he could whip it out, the tip of Melvin's nose withdrew from the side of his face. Facing him, Melvin said, "You sprayed cologne." The two of them were so near each other that Carter could smell even the prison laundry detergent from Melvin's body. It was clearly a cool morning, yet he felt as though the area enclosed by the office desk was as hot as a sauna. "Keep a distance from me." Carter suddenly pushed Melvin away. The office chair clacked, returning to its usual vertical position. "Have you always used this brand of cologne?" Holding the mouse, Melvin adeptly opened the web pages, his eyes gazing at the screen, asking absently. At this, Carter finally found a problem. To alert Melvin in the past, he had smashed an entire bottle of cologne in Melvin's bedroom. When he went over with Grant to Melvin's house, broken glass shards from the cologne bottle remained strewn across the ground. "This guy's nose can't be that sharp, right?" "It's none of your business," Carter said frostily. "This page, please." Melvin inclined his chin towards the information on the web page. "Officer James." Carter secretly sighed in relief when he saw that Melvin wasn't pursuing the matter. He tempered himself to start reading the information on the page aloud. But no more than 2 lines later, Melvin looked at him and said, "Do you know, Officer James, my entire bedroom smells of your cologne." "The consumer price index is—" Carter almost bit his tongue off. "It's quite a unique fragrance," Melvin said. "Grapefruit." This guy's nose was that sharp. Pretending not to hear him, Carter continued to read. "The producer price index is—" "Aren't you curious why my bedroom would smell of your cologne?" Carter knew that he couldn't go on with the charade. He exhaled and, looking at Melvin, asked, "Is it strange to use the same brand of cologne?" Melvin pondered this for a moment, then said, "Not really, go on." By now, Carter could tell that he couldn't simply brush Melvin off to deal with him. The more he tried to brush him off, the more Melvin would probe. Only by meeting him squarely would no openings be exposed to Melvin. After he narrated the important financial news of the morning, Melvin started to study the stock trends. Carter originally thought that he could rest for a while, but what actually happened was that Melvin put the book, Strawberry Planting Techniques, in front of him. "If you may, Officer James." Carter really couldn't restrain himself, asking, "Can you actually hear me when you're studying the stock trends?" He deeply suspected that his words went in one ear and out the other, that Melvin was simply using his voice as background music while studying the market. However, Melvin instead showed quizzical expression. He looked at Carter and asked, "Can't you multitask?" "Nope. Reading books and studying the market were 2 separate things." Carter didn't believe that normal people could juggle 2 things that needed brainpower at the same time. He asked out of the blue, "What is the flowering period of strawberries?" Melvin immediately responded, "April to May." "Fruiting period?" "June to July. Each plant can bear 6 or 7 fruits." "Fine, I'll give it to you." Carter was choked speechless. He picked up the book anew, but Melvin suddenly asked him, "Officer James, do you stir-fry stocks?" "No," said Carter. "Stir-frying stocks. Basically, trading stocks." "Why not?" "I don't want to be turned into a leak." "If you follow me, your leaks won't be cut." Leaks describe gullible retail investors who have lost their money, cut down by big players. Melvin looked at Carter earnestly, as if he genuinely wanted to bring Carter to do stocks, but Carter didn't want to owe him anything. "Are you certain?" Carter arched his brows, saying without scruple, "Have you forgotten how you ended up in prison?"